Anyone who loves Jesus is his slave. Out of love for their master, they obey. They live as Jesus lived and give as Jesus gave. One of Jesus' slaves was the Apostle Paul, who obeyed his master even when his obedience imprisoned him in chains. Paul sacrificially gave himself to save others, as Jesus gave himself to free him. And one of the people Paul showed how to be Jesus' slave was a man named Philemon. Philemon worked with Paul to plant a church in his home, and like many households in his day, Philemon's house was run by slaves. These bond servants would attend to the house church congregants, completing humble tasks like foot washing with obedience and deference. But one of Philemon's slaves grew tired of being used for his usefulness, and the servant's name was Onesimus. Onesimus would have heard of how Jesus, though God in the flesh, enslaved himself to others through acts of service. He would have heard how Jesus washed feet as he washed feet, how Jesus served a feast as he served a feast, how Jesus was bound and seized as he felt bound and seized. But Onesimus, unlike this Jesus, did not want to be a slave. He wanted his own release. So he decided to flee. And this flight brought a great cost to Philemon's estate and wealth. For no matter what he took, the most costly thing his master lost was Onesimus himself. This flight grieved Philemon. Having a runaway slave would bring shame and slandering, not to mention losing a useful member of your household family. With this situation, a question came. How would one of Jesus' slaves handle a runaway? How would Philemon love Jesus and Onesimus? What would it look like for him to obey? How should he go about living as Jesus lived and giving as Jesus gave? As for Onesimus, he was running from a debt he could not pay. How could he ever be free if he was always a runaway? So Onesimus found Paul, who himself was imprisoned and enslaved. He came to Paul, lost and as a runaway, desperate and afraid, for Onesimus owed a debt he could not pay. Like Paul, he may too soon be in chains. He was, but did not want to be, a slave. In response, Paul showed Onesimus a different way to see servitude, a different frame through which to view his chains. Paul served this slave, though he was enslaved. Paul attended to this runaway as an incarcerated inmate. Paul obeyed his master by treating Onesimus with service and deference in order to show him the truth about Jesus. For Jesus became a slave, though he was God himself. And though absolutely free, Jesus washed feet. Though Jesus could have been waited on by myriads of servants serving the finest delicacies, Jesus served his own body and blood as the feast. Though Jesus was Lord and Master over all, though he is King of Kings, Jesus, like a runaway slave, was bound and seized. Paul showed Onesimus the good news preached from his chains, that our master loved us so much he became our slave. He served us with how he lived, and his very life is what he gave. So Onesimus came to love Jesus. He became his slave, and out of love for his new master, he would obey. He would live as Jesus lived and give as Jesus gave. This is what became of Onesimus, Philemon's slave. As Onesimus lived as Jesus lived and gave as Jesus gave, he became useful to Paul in his imprisoned state. While Paul wanted to keep Onesimus by his side, he knew there was something bigger at stake. For Philemon was still owed a debt that Onesimus should repay. And being enslaved to Jesus meant Onesimus needed to return to Philemon's estate. Not necessarily to be his slave, but to give them both a chance to obey. So Paul sent his beloved Onesimus back with the promise of enough money to buy this slave's freedom, but also with the short, powerful letter we know as Philemon. As the house church continued to meet, they knew of Philemon's runaway slave and the debt and shame brought by his retreat. So when Onesimus returned with a letter from Paul in his hand, Philemon and his congregation gathered to hear what Jesus, their master, would demand. As the letter was read out loud before Philemon and his church, everyone heard how Paul made a connection between how Paul had served Philemon and how he thought Onesimus should be served. Paul does not command Philemon to be reconciled to his slave. He does not command him to forgive him for how he behaved. He does not command Philemon to absorb the debt that needed to be paid. Instead, he appeals to how he, Paul himself, had been Philemon's slave. Paul had served Philemon with the gospel. It was because of Paul that he was saved. Paul had fed Philemon with good news. Everything his master called him to do, Paul obeyed. And because of this obedience, because of this service to Jesus, Paul was imprisoned and enslaved. Through his own life, Paul was reminding Philemon of what Jesus did for him, how Jesus was his slave. And now, since Jesus is his master, Philemon must obey. He must live as Jesus lived. He must give as Jesus gave. He must see how Jesus served him when he was a runaway and serve Onesimus in the same way. This is what our Master does for all of us who have run away, all of us who have a debt to pay. Jesus pays the debt. On the cross, he paid the price for every slave. Jesus took our place. Our Master became a slave to serve us and save us so that we could do the same, so that we, like Philemon, could have brothers instead of slaves, so we, like Onesimus, could be reconciled to our Master even though we had run away. If we love Jesus, we are his slave. Out of love for our Master, we obey. We live as Jesus lived. We give as Jesus gave. Hey everybody, I'm David with Spoken Gospel. Thank you so much for watching our video introducing the book of Philemon. We are Spoken Gospel. We're a nonprofit ministry and we're dedicated to coming alongside Bible readers like you and explaining what they're reading in the Bible and how it all points to Jesus. And you can join our ministry in two ways. First, come read the Bible with us. We have lots of free resources for you, and we would love to explain what you're reading in any part of the Bible and how it all points to Jesus. Or two, you can become a financial supporter of ours to make all of this possible, because we give away everything for free and depend on people like you to support us. So you can give a one-time gift or a monthly gift, but whatever you want to do, however you want to join us, you can do it all at our website, spokengospel.com.